Mansfield and mates on a Saturday. Now you see, why didn't I have mates like this when I was at school? Sazi Bongwe, who picked up how many distinctions, Sazi?
9 of them.
How do you go? How do you go into a matric year, looking at staring 9 subjects down the barrel, and saying to yourself, "I'm going to get a distinction for all of these"? Is that what you did? Did you say that?
I mean, this is the answer I've given everyone, but really it was being in a competitive environment. I mean, I looked at my other friends and they were achieving ridiculously across all of their subjects. And so, I mean, as scary and as unrealistic as it may sound, this kind of level of achievement kind of became the norm, and that was just the environment I was in. So, yeah, I think 9 distinctions or sort of achieving distinctions, all the subjects, that was kind of like an unsaid agreement or a base level, and then it was about achieving from there.
Let's go back in time. Early days of Sazibongwe. I mean, where did you start school?
Yeah, so I lived in Kempton Park for like the first few years of my life. That's where I was born.
Yeah.
So I went to school in a school called Solid Foundations Primary School, which is quite a small school in Kempton Park. And then in grade 6 was when I moved over to St. John's, and so I did 2 years in the prep school, then obviously all 5 years of high school.
Was it always a very pressured environment to live in? Were the guys always sort of going for it and pushing themselves and each other?
There was a good work-play divide, is what I'll say. I mean, there were times where we knew that we weren't working, but when we were working, there was definitely a competitiveness to it. And definitely you got the sense that there was a standard, that everybody knew what was going on, and that we were more than anything invested in each other's achievement. So that was also a nice dynamic.
It's an interesting one, that, because I went to a co-educational school, and I've always wondered about the different dynamics between a co-ed education and a single education, or a gender-based education, put it that way.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I'd give you 2 different answers based on when in my high school journey you asked me. Toward the beginning, I think definitely the kind of boys' school sort of camaraderie that they speak of, that was quite heightened, and you got a lot of that. But increasingly, we started to have conversations about whether single-sex schools could survive, especially, I mean, all conversations around gender fluidity and people trans students and what that meant for single-sex schools. So those are conversations that were happening. What I will say is that I had many friendships with girls who were in other schools, and they sort of pushed me equally as the people in my classes at St. John's pushed me. So I mean, I think that there's a case for both, but retrospectively, we just went on with our schoolwork, and I don't even think that was something we considered that much.
Yeah. Let's go forward now, because the next step is Harvard, and I mean, people hear that word and they go, "Holy shit, Harvard!" But technically, yes, they pick and choose their students, but it is another American university, albeit a very good one, with a lot of backing to it, and it's got the prestige. How did that process come about? How did you end up going to Harvard?
Yeah, so it had always been a conversation amongst my family and I that if not Harvard, at least those kinds of Ivy League universities in the States was where I'd be setting my sights. My sister's graduating her master's from Georgetown, so I mean that was the kind of example that I had. And then I think really in the beginning of grade 11 was when I had to then be a bit serious about the application process and actually make sure that beyond just the prestige and just the name, that this was actually something I wanted to do, and that was in reach for me. So I went through the whole application process. I mean, it starts with some of the most standard things like writing the SAT, and then it gets into sort of you then listing your achievements and reflecting on things you've done in high school, and writing quite a few essays that are quite personal, have to do with your vocation and what you see yourself doing and using education for. So, I mean, that whole process sort of was about a 2-year one where, I mean, there were other friends who were doing it with me. And then in the end of October was when I submitted my application. And I had to be clear on why I was choosing Harvard as opposed to other schools, because for that early round, you're really making a decision of what school it is you want to apply to. So I did that and I went through all these considerations. And then I waited until mid-December, December 17th in the morning. And that's when I got my decision.
To be blunt with you though, and I know this to a certain extent because my daughter graduated from a university in the UK. These days, universities aren't just looking for students who have 9 distinctions. They're looking for students who may have 9 distinctions, but they want to know what you as a student are going to bring to the university. You know, what sort of diversity are you going to bring to the university? What's your input going to be? And that must be a difficult one to try and explain to people.
It is difficult, and you hear a lot of students guarding against other students attaching their self-worth to their application, because that's the level of personal investment you're getting, because really you're not only thinking of yourself as an academic applicant, you're really thinking of yourself as selling yourself and selling your personality, and that can be a very, I'd say, toxic, but just difficult space to navigate. And when it came to me, really, especially as a South African applying to an American sort of elitist, privileged university, I had to think quite realistically about what it meant for me to say that I want to be on your campus and do you want me? So yeah, I thought about the different kinds of work I'd done in high school. St. John's is not exactly in terms of scale Harvard, but similar kind of environment, I'd say. And so I'd had that experience. But yeah, definitely it's quite shocking to see the level of personal outpour that you're doing in that application.
Speaking of personal outpour, I mean, it must be very difficult going over to the States to study there when, and I would imagine, I may be wrong, but I would imagine that there's a part of you that wants to impart the knowledge that you're gaining into this world that we call home here in South Africa. Is that part of your long-term strategy? I know that there are a lot of South Africans who have gone over either to varsity or on business, from a business point of view, who have contributed back to the country.
Yeah, that definitely is a goal of mine. And actually, I mean, I've spoken to quite a few people who are older than me and have had that experience of going to an overseas university and coming back. I mean, Sizwempo Welsh is one of them who was at Oxford, and Shaira Carlo was at Oxford as well. And I've spoken to a few Harvard South Africans, and there's a kind of agreement that there are ways of keeping yourself connected and in tune with South African dynamics, even from being far away. So, I mean, when I look at what I see myself doing at Harvard and kind of my trajectory, it's very much informed by my South African experience. I mean, I think like economic inequality is one of the things that I'm particularly interested in, and that comes directly from growing up as a South African and mainly as a privileged Black South African, and that being a really unique experience. So, I mean, these questions that stem ultimately from my upbringing are ones that are still there, and they're not just going to go away because I'm in a new environment all of a sudden. So definitely I'm keeping in tune with South Africa, but also I think getting a really interesting sort of high level perspective as I go, because I can look at the country a bit removed from it. So definitely looking to take the kind of expertise that I hope to be able to gather and come back and use that in the most meaningful way I can.
Well, we wish you all the best of luck from Mansfield today. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
And the main thing is go and have fun.
Yeah. Definitely.
That's what varsity is really all about.
Yeah.
Don't let them kid you.
I'm looking forward to that elements of it. Yeah.